On the quiet outskirts of town, a furious argument shatters the peace of an otherwise tranquil neighborhood. For the residents, loud arguments from that particular house were nothing new, but this one felt different. The tension was sharper, somehow heavier. Moments later, a call came into emergency services. The caller's voice was trembling, fractured, as if they couldn't string together a coherent thought. The dispatcher had no way of knowing they were sending officers directly into the opening chapter of a tragedy, one that would soon capture the attention of the entire nation. Von Bülow grew up in Debut, the son of a respected family, and quickly made a name for himself with his love for sports and his innate social magnetism. His confidence, easygoing manner, and natural charm made him a standout, a popular leader among his peers. Samantha Link's journey, however, was different. She was raised in a household where discipline and hard work were paramount. From a young age, she was drawn to athletics, constantly pushing herself to prove her strength and determination. But during her teenage years, she was diagnosed with mental health conditions that demanded consistent medical supervision and a daily regimen of medication. While the treatment helped keep her stable, it also came with bouts of moodiness and irritability. She had also endured past relationships defined by control and emotional coercion, experiences that left deep emotional scars, fueling a fear of losing control and a profound need for constant reassurance. Despite these challenges, Samantha projected an image of energy and ambition, a woman with a clear sense of direction and the drive to follow it. She and Von's lives first intersected at a party hosted by their mutual friend, Cassie. It was an evening of music and laughter, a typical gathering that would unexpectedly become a pivotal moment for them both. Von was in his element, telling jokes and effortlessly winning over the crowd with his easy charm. Samantha observed him with a mixture of caution and intrigue. Once they finally started talking, it became clear they connected over shared interests and values. An undeniable spark was lit. Within just a few days, casual texts and evening strolls had blossomed into something far more significant. Their decision to move in together so soon stunned their friends, who were shocked by the speed at which things had escalated. It was as if they'd skipped the typical, slow, cautious stage of getting to know one another and jumped headfirst into a fully committed relationship. But once under the same roof, their differences began to surface almost immediately. Samantha craved stability and a peaceful home, a sanctuary where her emotional needs would be met. Von, meanwhile, maintained his usual routine: late nights out, parties, and hanging out with his friends. What felt like neglect to Samantha was, to Von, just a normal part of life. In the beginning, these differences seemed like complementary traits that balanced them out. But as time went on, the growing chasm between their needs started to strain their relationship. Their conflicting visions of what a partnership should be slowly eroded the foundation they had built. To the outside world, they still appeared to be the ideal couple. He was the outgoing, charismatic figure everyone knew, while she was the steady, quiet presence by his side. And yet, those closest to them began to see the early warning signs. Samantha became increasingly uneasy with how freely Von interacted with other people, particularly other women. He, on the other hand, saw his friendliness as completely harmless. He would often dismiss her concerns or laugh them off, a reaction that only intensified her insecurities. On the surface, however, their relationship still looked solid. They kept talking about their future, supported each other through tough times, and made an effort to stay close. But just beneath the surface, Samantha was feeling a mounting pressure. For her, being with Von represented a chance at the stability she craved, a partner she could truly count on. For him, the relationship was more about the excitement, the attention, and the instant connection they shared. They're fundamentally different. Expectations began to become more apparent to those around them. As more time passed, the cracks in their relationship became impossible to ignore. Samantha's well-being was heavily dependent on a strict regimen of medication and regular medical appointments. For her, predictability was essential. Any deviation from her routine left her feeling like she was losing control. But Von didn't always seem to grasp the gravity of her situation. He believed his role was to support her through the tough times, not to completely re-engineer his own life to accommodate hers. Minor irritations began to build. His constant tardiness, missed promises, and his habit of eagerly saying yes to social events, even on nights she felt unwell. Her reactions often came across as harsh critiques, which he dismissed as theatrics. She repeatedly tried to discuss their future, searching for reassurance and a clear path forward, but he would evade any definitive commitment. Her anxiety intensified, fueling his own frustration. Yet, despite the mounting pressure, their emotional connection remained. This vicious cycle, a deep bond intertwined with escalating bitterness, began to define their relationship. Following one especially volatile fight, Samantha sought refuge at her mother's house, hoping some space would give her clarity. In time, they agreed to go back home together. But the car ride was heavy with a deafening silence, punctured only by brief, pointed accusations. The atmosphere inside the car was suffocating, as neither was willing to be the first to concede. For Vaughn, that drive home served as a moment of stark realization. He was starting to believe their relationship had run its course. Samantha, on the other hand, voiced her frustrations openly, demanding answers and escalating the fight. Arriving home brought them no peace. Within just a few hours, the fighting resumed. Samantha pleaded with him for more affection and dedication, needing some kind of proof that he was truly invested in their future together, and not just staying out of convenience. Vaughn responded by pulling away emotionally, claiming her expectations were crushing and that he felt smothered by her needs. Shortly after, he made the decision to break up, viewing it as his only escape from the constant emotional pressure. He told her plainly that he saw no future for them as a couple. For Samantha, the breakup was absolutely devastating. She had built her entire sense of security around the relationship and couldn't imagine letting it go. In the middle of this turmoil, a new element was introduced. A video Vaughn uploaded online. In it, he addressed his followers directly, making remarks that could easily be interpreted as veiled jabs about their private disputes. The act seemed callous, as if he were broadcasting their personal problems for the world to see. To her, this was a clear signal that he had no interest in fixing what was broken between them. Soon, their war of words crossed a dangerous threshold and became physical. A furious argument boiled over to the point where words failed. In the heat of the moment, Vaughn allegedly told Samantha he wanted her gone, that he could no longer stand having her in the house. This wasn't just a flash of anger. It was a final, unambiguous declaration that he wanted her out of his life. That moment was the point of no return. The video he'd posted seemed to pour gasoline on the fire of what was to come inside the home they shared. Later, Vaughn would claim that following the confrontation, Samantha, overcome with emotion and unstable, had impulsively taken a knife from the kitchen and harmed herself at least. That was his version of events. He insisted it was an act directed at herself, not an attack on him. He denied playing any part, telling authorities he had attempted to step in, but was powerless to stop her. However, the scene that first responders discovered painted a much more complicated picture. Paramedics discovered Samantha unresponsive on the kitchen floor, with 3 distinct puncture wounds in vital areas. The positioning of her body and the characteristics of the wounds did not seem to match Vaughn's story. While medics fought to save her life, police officers on the scene paid close attention to Vaughn's demeanor, and what they witnessed was alarming. Instead of showing shock or worry, he appeared visibly annoyed and hostile. Onlookers reported that he was yelling at the responding officers, arguing with them and behaving belligerently. To the police at the scene, this conduct was a major red flag, suggesting this was far more than just a domestic argument. A much darker picture began to take shape. Once Van Ebuelo was in custody, investigators immediately noticed glaring inconsistencies in his story. Detectives grilled him for details, the precise timeline of events, where he was when it happened, and exactly what he did. But his responses were evasive and, at times, contradictory, which immediately raised suspicion. Soon, one of the most crucial pieces of evidence would turn out to be his own cell phone. A recording on the device had captured a heated argument and Vaughn's aggressive actions, which included making direct threats against Samantha. Officers observed how agitated he seemed, a stark contradiction to his story of having calmly tried to intervene. This glaring discrepancy between the video evidence and his account of what happened only deepened their suspicions. Furthermore, text messages retrieved from his phone laid bare a pattern of constant arguments and traded accusations in the days before the incident. These messages painted a picture of a relationship teetering on the edge, revealing that what happened wasn't a sudden outburst, but the boiling point of a long simmering conflict. Just hours into the investigation, police secured a crucial piece of evidence: the video from Vaughn's own phone. It was a direct rebuttal to his entire story, shattering his credibility and building a solid foundation for a case against him. Later, medical examiners would conclude that Samantha Link's injuries were far more consistent with a physical struggle. They pointed out that the type and location of the wounds simply didn't match up with any claim of self-harm, and the probability that someone could inflict those kinds of injuries on themselves in such a brief time frame was incredibly small. These expert conclusions delivered a devastating blow to Vaughn's narrative. Meanwhile, investigators began reviewing security footage from neighboring homes and collecting witness statements. Neighbors recalled hearing piercing screams that night. With every new piece of evidence, the story Vaughn had spun for detectives started to unravel, making it increasingly clear he was hiding the truth. His account was looking less like a plausible explanation and more like a desperate, poorly built alibi. From the very start, Samantha Link's family had their doubts. They knew the relationship was troubled and were adamant that Samantha had never shown any signs of wanting to harm herself. Her mother informed investigators that Samantha was making plans for her future and had never exhibited behavior that would suggest emotional instability. This testimony flew directly in the face of Vaughn's attempt to portray Samantha as overwhelmed and impulsive. The public reaction was swift, with local news outlets covering the case, igniting a firestorm of discussion across social media. A consensus started to form online and in the community. Many believed Vaughn was trying to deflect blame. This court of public opinion, combined with the steadfast support of Samantha's family, became a significant force in the investigation. Detectives understood that community feeling and the network of support for the victim could influence how the case was presented and ultimately perceived in a courtroom. What began as a private dispute had quickly spiraled into a major criminal investigation that was now capturing the nation's attention. As more details surfaced, the story triggered powerful reactions, with the community demanding justice for Samantha, while Samantha Link's family pushed for a complete and unbiased investigation. A full-scale forensic analysis was launched to uncover the truth behind the tragic incident, with medical experts meticulously examining the nature of the injuries Samantha had suffered. The forensic reports revealed that Samantha's injuries had been inflicted with varying degrees of force from multiple angles. Experts also pointed to a crucial missing detail: the absence of typical defensive wounds, or signs of self-inflicted harm. A psychological evaluation also came back with no evidence that Samantha suffered from any serious mental health conditions, and her records confirmed she had never been officially diagnosed with any disorder that would explain the kind of behavior Vaughn was describing. She wasn't being treated by any mental health professionals, and there was no paper trail whatsoever to suggest emotional instability. These findings represented a major turning point in the investigation. Combined with the video evidence and witness accounts, the case was now bolstered by solid expert analysis. The consensus was unanimous. The theory that Samantha had harmed herself simply didn't hold water. These results became the bedrock of the prosecution's case, dramatically strengthening their hand and moving everything one step closer to a trial. The trial of Von Fontainebleau was held in Rockwall County, Texas, a small, conservative town where a case like this was guaranteed to draw intense public scrutiny. The courtroom was filled to capacity with local residents, journalists, and curious citizens, all waiting to see how the proceedings would unfold. Presiding over the trial was Judge George Ashford, a man known for his no-nonsense, direct approach. However, one of his rulings immediately raised eyebrows: his decision to limit any discussion of Samantha Link's mental health. He forbade any mention of her visits to a psychologist, a move that many argued prevented the jury from getting a full picture of her state of mind. This restriction would become a major point of contention as the trial got underway, shaping how the case was being framed. The prosecution, on the other hand, built its case around the medical evidence, zeroing in on bruises and marks on Samantha's arms and shoulders that just couldn't have been self-inflicted. Crime scene photos depicted a state of disarray and blood spatter that pointed to a violent physical struggle, not a voluntary act. Vaughn's defense team tried to flip the script, arguing he had acted in self-defense during an unforeseen, emotional outburst from Samantha. They highlighted her text messages and portrayed her as emotionally volatile, but their claims were systematically dismantled by witness testimony. Samantha's closest friends testified one after another that she was actively making concrete plans for her immediate future. She had been talking about a new job opportunity and a trip she was planning, details that flew in the face of the defense's depiction of her as unstable or in crisis. A pivotal moment in the trial arrived when an audio recording was played for the court. In it, Vaughn's voice can be heard saying, "Don't get dumb." The prosecution argued this was a clear sign of his escalating frustration and a precursor to the violence that followed. The defense insisted the recording, was nothing more than a snippet of a common argument, completely taken out of context. However, both the jury and the public appeared to see it as part of a larger pattern of tension and conflict. Von Bülow's own conduct during the trial also came under intense scrutiny. He repeatedly changed details in his testimony, had trouble keeping his timeline straight, and often dodged direct questions. The court made a note of these inconsistencies, which further eroded the credibility of his entire defense. As the trial wore on, the narrative turned decisively against von Bülow. The prosecution laid out a coherent case built on solid evidence, while the defense's arguments came across as weak and full of holes. The focus soon shifted to the jury, whose closed-door deliberations became fraught with tension and sharp disagreements. Some jurors expressed serious doubts about Von's guilt, while others were pushing for the maximum possible sentence. The pressure was high, and soon reports of outside influence began to surface. A letter from a juror named Andrew became a flashpoint of controversy, in which he admitted feeling pressured by both the judge and other, more aggressive jurors. Even though the letter would later be used in an appeal, at the time it only intensified the already charged atmosphere in the courtroom. Judge Ashford, instead of staying impartial, took a heavy-handed approach. He openly prodded the jury to come to a unanimous verdict, essentially guiding them toward a specific outcome. At several points, he cut into the proceedings, restricted lines of questioning for Von's attorneys, and threw out evidence that could have been beneficial to the defense. Journalists covering the trial noted that the judge's behavior was creating a clear and unfair imbalance in the courtroom. Outside the courthouse, public pressure was continuing to build. Samantha's family gave frequent interviews to the media, casting her as the innocent victim and Von as the vicious aggressor. Local papers published gut-wrenching accounts of her last days, featuring interviews with friends and family. Despite the court's strict orders to avoid media coverage, some of this information inevitably made its way to the jurors. A crucial moment occurred when more messages from Samantha's private conversations were brought into evidence. These messages made it clear she wanted to break off the relationship and get on with her life. For the prosecution, this was the final nail in the coffin for the defense's narrative. By this stage, it was obvious the defense had no leg left to stand on. The jury was no longer debating different versions of what happened. They were now weighing the severity of the punishment. The internal pressures inside the jury room, combined with the judge's overbearing tactics, had swung the momentum squarely in the prosecution's favor. After weeks of emotional testimony and grueling legal arguments, the courtroom braced for the final verdict. The jury filed back in, and Judge Ashford read it aloud. Von Bülow was found guilty of the crime against Samantha Link and was sentenced to 50 years in prison. A profound silence fell over the courtroom, quickly followed by a rush of mixed emotions. Von showed no outward sign of panic at the sentence, but the strain on his face was undeniable. He had denied any wrongdoing from the very beginning and continued to insist on his innocence even after the guilty verdict. His immediate response was to announce his plans to appeal, claiming the evidence was misconstrued and that the full context of that night was never given a fair hearing. For Samantha Link's family, the verdict brought a palpable sense of relief. To them, it signified a degree of justice, even if it could never erase the profound loss they had endured. Loved ones seated in the courtroom openly wept, expressing their gratitude to the prosecutors and the court for delivering a long-awaited feeling of closure. Public reaction to the verdict, however, was starkly divided. Some saw the outcome as a just and fitting end to a difficult investigation, while others questioned whether the trial had been truly impartial. Von's supporters, including his inner circle, maintained that the investigation had been biased from the very start. Meanwhile, many others held Von responsible, viewing him as a calculating offender who got the sentence he deserved. One of the most fiercely debated issues was the dismissal of a juror, an action that Von's supporters argued had compromised the trial's integrity and warranted a full retrial. After the sentence was handed down, public opinion grew even more polarized, with local media heavily featuring the divide. Some observers, swayed by Von's demeanor throughout the trial, organized advocacy groups that called for a review of the case. At the same time, others, pointing to the prosecution's arguments and what they considered overwhelming evidence, believed the verdict was the final word, even if it failed to settle the controversy. The ruling only intensified the debate. To some, Von Bülow became the face of a cold-blooded crime. To others, he seemed to be a man crushed by a system that was eager to secure a conviction. Immediately following the sentencing, Von's legal team began preparing an appeal. His attorneys, contended that the investigation was riddled with procedural errors and that crucial evidence introduced at trial had been framed in a way that unfairly prejudiced the jury against him. In interviews and public statements, Vaughn maintained that authorities had zeroed in on him as the prime suspect from the outset, dismissing any alternative theories. His legal team also challenged the admission of video footage, recorded inside the house just before the incident. They argued that sections of the conversation were taken out of context, potentially skewing the jury's perception. The appeals court agreed to review the case materials, though the process was anticipated to be a long one. In the meantime, Vaughn remained behind bars, while his supporters mounted a public campaign demanding a new trial. Critics of the movement, however, saw the effort as an attempt to relitigate a case that was already decided by compelling evidence, and so, the case entered its next chapter. Even after the sentencing, it continued to divide public opinion and fuel a fierce debate over the real story of Von Abuelo. As preparations for the appeal moved forward, independent experts started playing a more prominent role in the proceedings. Vaughn's defense team enlisted specialists in forensic psychology and criminal investigation to add weight to his version of events. One expert suggested that under certain conditions of emotional duress, the nature of Samantha Link's wounds could be consistent with self-harm. Another pointed out the absence of direct eyewitnesses to the altercation at the precise moment it took place. The prosecution fired back with its own expert analysis, emphasizing the forensic findings, the trajectory of the blood spatter, and the positioning of Samantha's body in the kitchen as powerful indicators that the injuries were inflicted by another person. Meanwhile, the public conversation shifted, turning increasingly toward the personal lives of Von Abuelo and Samantha Link, digging into the complexities of their relationship. Media outlets began combing through old social media posts and statements from friends and colleagues, as well as previously private aspects of the couple's history. Some reports alleged that Samantha had repeatedly voiced concerns about Vaughn's controlling behavior, while others painted a picture of her as someone who could be impulsive and prone to emotional outbursts. Even among experts, opinions were split. Some argued the case relied too heavily on circumstantial evidence, while others felt the collected facts pointed unequivocally to a guilty verdict. The debate soon spilled far beyond the courtroom, becoming fodder for talk shows, editorials, and heated online discussions. The case of Von Abuelo and Samantha Link had evolved into much more than a legal matter. The case transformed into a public spectacle, exposing the deep-seated divisions within society and the professional community alike. Every new analysis, public statement, or leaked detail only added fuel to the fire, drawing in more media attention and further entrenching the opposing viewpoints. Even after the sentence was delivered and the appeals process began, the case refused to fade from the headlines, with investigative journalists publishing numerous follow-up stories. These reports uncovered new angles and previously unknown details, with some articles delving into the financial side, including the disputes over Samantha's estate and claims made by her family. Social media became a crucial battleground, with dedicated support groups forming on both sides of the issue. Many users rallied to Vaughn's defense, utterly convinced that a grave miscarriage of justice had taken place. Meanwhile, others fiercely defended the verdict, viewing it as a long overdue moment of accountability. The case had, by now, transformed into a powerful symbol of the national debate, a clash between those who saw a broken justice system and those who believed it had performed exactly as it was designed to. It became seared into the nation's memory, not simply as a high-profile trial, but as one of the most divisive and intensely debated legal battles of the era, leaving an indelible mark on both American law and the national conversation. If you found this story as compelling as we did, be sure to hit the like button and subscribe to our channel. We drop new true crime videos every single night. Until the next one, stay sharp and stay safe.